Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now today we're testing the 16GB RTX 5060 Ti in 30 games at 1080p. Higher resolution benchmarks and other tests will follow, but for now let's see how this new card handles a range of titles at what is still the most popular resolution by far, according to the Steam hardware survey. The 16GB 5060 Ti has a recommended retail price of £399 here in the UK, and I've actually seen a couple of models in stock at this price point, including this Palette Infinity 3 version. Apparently there's an 8GB variant of the 5060 Ti as well, starting at $349, but I don't know if any reviewers got sent one of those. I'll see if I can find one to run some tests and comparisons with, but for now let's focus on this, the Palette Infinity 3 5060 Ti. Nice no frills triple fan design here with a single 8-pin connector, lovely. Temperatures sat at the high 50s, low 60s most of the time, and the card remained fairly quiet even under heavy load. I'm keeping things simple today, focusing purely on gameplay. There'll be no ranting and raving here. Not today anyway, but let's begin. We'll start with Atomfall. I'm really enjoying this one, 1080p with the Ultra preset for 125 FPS, a 1% low of 106 and a 0.1% low of 102. A nice consistent gameplay result to start with. I've paired the 5060 Ti with an i9 and 32 gigs of DDR5 to get the most out of it for this benchmark test, though we will be pairing the card with an older and weaker system at some point soon. Indiana Jones and the Great Circle next at the Ultra preset with DLAA. Now I've used DLAA in some games and it will impact the performance slightly more so in some games than others, but it looks a lot better than TAA, for example, and sometimes I think it's worth the performance trade-off. Here we saw 81 FPS, a 1% low of 69, nice, and a 0.1% low of 63. Call of Duty Black Ops 6 with the Ultra preset and DLAA once again for 104 FPS on average, with a 1% low of 87 and a 0.1% low of 82. It may be worth playing at a lower preset for this one, given that it's an online competitive shooter, but that's the beauty of PC gaming. It's entirely up to you with what settings you go for. Now for Cyberpunk 2077, I did initially test with DLAA, but it was knocking like 20 frames off my average. We were getting about 85, something like that, and as soon as I switched that off, with the same Ultra preset, of course, we saw a jump to 110, and it doesn't look like a complete blurry mess with the native AA solution like some games do, so I thought I'd just leave it alone here. 110 FPS with a 1% low of 78 and a 0.1% low of 63. Apex Legends at 1080p with the highest settings and TSAA for 251 frames per second. You might want to turn things down a little bit as this is an online competitive title, but I thought given that the card could handle this frame rate with these settings, I thought I may as well just leave everything at its respective highest here. Baldur's Gate 3 at Ultra here with DLAA once again for 144 frames per second overall. The 1% low was 92 and the 0.1% figure was 59. Not too many dips and drops in and around the busy city here. Counter-Strike 2 with the high preset and 4x MSAA. This is actually how the game defaulted. I started it up and these were the settings already in place, so I thought why not leave things as they are, and in return we saw 301 FPS overall, a 1% low of 100 and a 0.1% figure of 44. Grand Theft Auto 5 next. This is the enhanced version of the game with added ray tracing presets. I actually turned things up to maximum RT, made a couple of changes. That was to the post FX, which turns off motion blur and things like that, simply as a personal preference. DLAA remained on. This does have TAA, but it is quite a soft image, so again I think it's worth the performance trade-off for a sharper overall picture, and we saw 101 FPS here with a 1% low of 84 and a 0.1% low of 78. Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, the Ultra preset here with SMAA 2TX for 90 frames per second overall, a 1% low of 73 and a 0.1% low of 70, so another consistent result here. I did think about using the experimental settings. I can't see that much of a difference between the two graphical presets, at least not without direct side-by-side slides, so I just kept things at ultra here for 90 FPS overall. Spider-Man 2 can be quite problematic on PC, 85 FPS overall, a 1% low of 43 and a 0.1% low of 36. The average was okay, but there were a few dips and drops with this one. I wanted to include the original Red Dead Redemption because it's a fantastic game, and at the ultra preset with DLAA it runs no problem with the 144 FPS cap, averaging exactly that. The 1% low was 140 and the 0.1% low was 96, so you're not going to have many issues with this one as expected, as it is an older game ported to PC. Still holds up well visually though, in my opinion, and runs on a wide range of hardware. Modern cards like this will handle it really well. Starfield is potentially the most demanding game tested today. High preset here for 73 frames per second. Pushing things to ultra will see more dips and drops below 60 FPS, even with the average frame rate. The 1% low was 57 and the 0.1% low was 31. There were one or two areas whereby we saw a couple of little dips and drops with the frame time graph, and that is reflected in these figures. The Witcher 3, the next gen updated version of the game, ultra here with screen space reflection set to high and TAAU, 115 as an average with a 1% low of 97 and a 0.1% low of 57. The Last of Us Part 1 still holds up really nicely, especially when the settings are turned right up. We have the ultra preset here with DLAA for 89 frames per second, a 1% low of 68 and a 0.1% low of 58. I wanted to throw in Left 4 Dead 2 because it's still a game that appears amongst Steam's most popular titles, so definitely still being played, and I imagine that it's not just those with older systems that are running this one. So I tested it with the absolute highest settings and 8x MSAA for 458 frames per second at 1080p, a 1% low of 196 and a 0.1% low of 84. This is one of those games that I just like to sit down with every so often and blast through a couple of levels. Mafia Definitive Edition, 1080p with the highest settings. This still holds up really well. I think this remake came out in 2020, 2021, somewhere around there. It looks good. Still, I have set the field of view a little high. I mean, my car looks miles away from the camera here, so I need to make some adjustments to that. But performance-wise, really good here, 193 FPS on average, 1% low of 121 and a 0.1% low of 44. Fortnite next. Again, this is an online competitive title, so you may want to be a little more careful of which settings you choose in order to maximise your frame rates. I thought we may as well just go with high, turn nanite off. I don't really need any of those fancy features for online play, not in my opinion, or not as my personal preference. We saw 197 FPS here with these graphical settings, a 1% low of 116 and a 0.1% low of 53. Red Dead Redemption 2 now with the ultra textures and everything else set to high looks absolutely fantastic. This came out in around 2018, was it, on PC? Still holds up really well, 106 FPS on average, a 1% low of 85 and a 0.1% low of 77. Sorry if the footage is a bit dark. I benchmark this a lot in the day, and of course the day-night cycle occurs naturally, so it just so happens that I end up benchmarking it at night as well for a while, but should be daytime again pretty soon. Sons of the Forest next with the ultra preset. We have TAA here as an anti-aliasing option, 114 frames per second. This looks pretty good. 75 FPS was that 1% low. The 0.1% figure was a little low at 20, but there were a couple of little stutters when I began chopping trees down, but that was about it really. Nothing too much to complain about here. Days Gone. Now, I really enjoy this. I first played it on PlayStation 4, I believe, back in the day. It looks great. It's a really fun game. If you haven't tried it, I definitely recommend it, and you'll be pleased to know that on PC it runs really well. As you can see here, 171 FPS, a 1% low of 97 and a 0.1% low of 48. This is an absolutely massive map, so performance will be subject to change, of course, depending on where you are and what you're doing, but I guess the same can be said for every game. The benchmarks you see are from the same areas in which I've actually played, and all footage was recorded externally for no performance loss. Forza Horizon 5 now with the Ultra preset DLAA for 180 FPS. This is really well optimized, runs really well on a wide range of graphics cards, and the 5060 Ti 16GB is no exception. As expected really, the 1% low was 144 and the 0.1% figure was 125. Helldivers 2 ran okay at Ultra with a decent average, but there were some issues with the percentile lows. Every so often there was a little stutter with the gameplay, and you can probably pick that up on the frame time graph to the left of your screen. Nothing too off-putting, and I couldn't really feel it as much as it was noticeable in the graph, but it is certainly there, and even dropping to the high preset didn't alleviate this, so not quite sure what was happening there. A big drop from the average to the 1% figure. Metro Exodus Enhanced Edition, this one will only run on ray tracing capable cards. I went with the Extreme preset, RT Ultra, and Reflections set to ray traced mode as well. More demanding than I thought actually, but it still looks really good. 83 FPS overall, a 1% low of 61, and a 0.1% low of 57 in this desert level here. I threw Grand Theft Auto San Andreas Definitive Edition back into the benchmarks. Now to me, I'd rather play the original game any day of the week, but this is more demanding on modern hardware. Of course, that said, it's not too difficult to run, but there are still some issues with consistency. The average was 202, the 1% low was 40, and the 0.1% low was 20. Now you can actually add a command line to run this in DX12, but while the average was improved, the stutters were worse, so I just left things at default here, DX11 mode. Far Cry 6, I never really got into that much. I played a few hours of it, as you can see here, but for some reason I then just stopped. That seems to be the case actually with a lot of games these days. Maybe my attention span is just awful, but we have the Ultra preset with the DXR options enabled, so that shadows and reflections turned on, along with TAA. We don't really have a better anti-aliasing option here than this. We saw 115 FPS on average, a 1% low of 95 and a 0.1% low of 80. Hogwarts Legacy is back in the benchmarks here, can be very demanding in specific areas. Here with the Ultra preset and DLAA, we saw 107 FPS in and around this town. Hogsmeade, I believe it's called, the first town. Again, this is another game I never really played that much. Just got to this first town and then just sort of stopped. I was like, this will do for a benchmark area, and then never played anymore for some reason. 107 overall, 1% low of 61, and a 0.1% low of 46. Shadow of the Tomb Raider at 1080p highest, SMAA set to T2X for 136. I'm playing one of the Tomb levels here. This one looks particularly good. The performance overall was pretty decent, 136, 96 and 92 overall, and this one still holds up visually in my opinion. It's one of those games that you can turn the settings right down and have it run on a wide range of hardware, or you can turn it right up and it can actually be quite demanding. Battlefield 1 up next. This is a fantastic game that I have enjoyed for many years now. Don't often get the chance to play it for long periods of time, but with the Ultra preset, runs like a dream, over 200 FPS, 234 to be exact, with a 1% low of 154 and a 0.1% low of 98. I actually uncapped the frame rate using a console command. Can't remember what it is now, but it's pretty easy to find. Otherwise the game will be limited at 200 frames per second maximum, so it's worth uncapping it to see how high you can really go. It's a bit more difficult to uncap Elden Ring, so I tend to leave it where it is. I'm not sure if it has negative effects on the physics, something like that, but I tend to leave things as it is. It's just a test of consistency more than anything else, to be honest. So it has a 60 FPS cap with a maximum preset and high ray tracing quality here. We actually hit that no problem with a 1% low of 54 and a 0.1% low of 39, so no issues stick out to me in this one. Black Myth Wukong to finalise for the native res benchmarks here with a very high preset, DLAA as well for 65 FPS, a 1% low of 48 and a 0.1% low of 25. With the cinematic preset, which is the highest preset available, yeah, we're not going to be running at 60 as an average. We're going to be somewhere around the low to mid 50s. Now then, let's finalise with a few ray tracing / DLSS benchmarks. We'll continue with Black Myth Wukong actually. 1080p, I thought we may as well go for the cinematic preset here. I thought let's go as high as we can while retaining somewhat decent performance figures. So we have cinematic with the very high full RT option. This of course meant that we had to enable DLSS and set it to 50% resolution. Now before enabling this, I went into the NVIDIA app and I went into the NVIDIA app, enabled the override and set it to the latest version of DLSS to ensure all of the games were using the latest version here. 62 frames per second for Black Myth, a 1% low of 51 and a 0.1% low of 44. Did notice the occasional little stutter here and there, particularly when switching between different areas, but nothing major. Spider-Man 2, highest settings here with the high RT preset, so not the maximum settings here. We still had to use DLSS performance actually in order to avoid some pretty big dips below 60 frames per second. 86 as an average, 1% low of 55 and a 0.1% low of 46. For Cyberpunk 2077, I went with the RT Overdrive preset, which enables path tracing. Set the DLSS mode to balanced for an average of 65 frames per second. This has the choice built in for the Transformer or the CNN DLSS modes. This is of course with the latest version set from within the NVIDIA app anyway, and overall we saw a plus 60 FPS average with respectable percentile figures. This actually looks really good with path tracing on. It's like a whole different game honestly, but you do have to ask yourselves as always if the drop is worth it. Finally then we'll have The Witcher 3, again with the next gen update applied, of course, RT Ultra this time around, again with DLSS balanced for an average of 81 frames per second, a 1% low of 64 and a 0.1% low of 46. This looks absolutely fantastic though. Again, we do have to make a bit of a sacrifice to the resolution in order to hit a consistent plus 60 FPS with the 5060 Ti 16 gig. But there we have it, the 16GB 5060 Ti in action. I'm working on a suite of comparative results to add better context to future gameplay tests, but for now, let me know your thoughts down below. Remember, the 5060 Ti comes in a 16GB and 8GB version, and I'll be testing the 8GB one as soon as I can, but please make sure you are aware of which version you're getting if you plan on buying one or if you can buy one, as the 8GB card has the potential to perform noticeably worse in certain games, especially at higher settings and resolutions. I'll confirm all of that though when I actually get to testing it. Don't want to comment too much on it now. Furthermore, consider alternatives and how they're priced where you live. It can seem like MSRP or RRP on new GPUs means absolutely nothing these days, so it's worth considering all your options and used market deals too. This is something I want to start looking into more, especially now. Can X card from X generation beat X card from a newer generation, etc. As for this one, well, thanks for watching. Leave your thoughts down below. I can imagine some of them, and let me know what pricing and availability is like where you live. Again, I can imagine the situation for some of you. It would actually be interesting to know though how things differ around the world. Testing modern graphics cards now just can seem or feel like a bit of a waste of time, but there are going to be some of you that will buy these cards. You can find them at decent prices. You want an upgrade, for example, from an older GPU, and hopefully by uploading these gameplay benchmark tests, you can just get an idea of how it's going to run and then decide whether or not that performance is suitable for your needs. So again, thank you for watching, and hopefully I'll see all of you in the next one.